All right, good morning. Today is Thursday, the 17th of November, and just a few minutes ago, I sent out today's email, and as it says, I'm going to go over chapter 22 today. All right. Now, when I go over it, there's only going to be a few things in this chapter that I'm going to concentrate on. And the reason for that, I think I've mentioned this before, but just on the off chance I have not, when you take the AWD 1115, either which will be offered either this summer or this fall, I don't know because nobody tells me anything, but then we will go over how to do a lot of this stuff in detail. The other thing is, just so you know, much of what is discussed in this chapter is aesthetic in nature. So, in other words, they tell you how to rename columns. They tell you how to make columns colorful, etc. I'm going to spend virtually no time on that because there's really no reason to do that at this point in time. So the idea is, as it says, there is to go over chapter 22 today. All right. Now, what I've decided I'm going to at least try to do, and I'm saying this on tape because I want to make sure that I'm held accountable. Um, I'm hoping that between tonight and tomorrow morning, I can literally get everything graded that has been turned in as of 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Now, the good news for me is if I do that, um, next Wednesday, you've got the written tests for chapters 19, 21, and 22 due. And then after that, the only thing that will be due will be this database project that we will start next Tuesday. All right. And of course, your electronic portfolio that's due at the end of the semester. But the point is, I'll be, what I really want is I want to get caught up on grading. I want people to see exactly where they are in the class. So tomorrow will be our usual lab day and no taping will be done. On Monday, and I've already shown this to you, but I am going to be doing this SQL tester thing. Again, it's going to look somewhat like this, but I'm already making changes to it. All right. But we will be able to come in, and this is a data grid view. So that's what we're talking about today. You'll be able to come in here, which is a text box that's multi-line. And if you type in select star from books, for example, and you click execute query, well, it doesn't like books. How about select star from customers? All right. And if we execute the query, boom, there it is. I'm not sure which database I'm going to use yet. We've got the MMA books one, which we might use. All right. But we also have one that I have created. And I'd like to at least show that to you. So you'll be able to write queries in here. All right. And the really neat thing is they don't have to be real simplistic queries like this. You can do joins and a lot of other stuff that we'll talk about on Monday. All right. When you clear, this is going to go away. This is going to clear. And the number that's here is it should be changed to 0, I believe. Yeah, and it is. And exit is our typical exit. So again, that's what we will end up doing on Monday. Not a real long program, but it is going to give me a chance. I'm going to send you this stuff right here. I will send this to you on Monday, but again, I'm cleaning it up. That's why I'm not sending it now. And what that is you'll notice there's only a few lines of code in there. There's literally 1, 2, 3, 4 lines of code, but yet I'm sending you pretty much 40 lines because I'm surrounding all that stuff with a lot of comments. So I can go over this stuff with you. And I'm not saying it's going to 100% resonate with you. I'm not going to say it's going to 100% make sense to you, but you will have been exposed to it. And again, the idea is when we go over it again in the AWD 1115 class, you'll be like, oh, okay, that's what he was talking about. All right. And that's, like I said, that's my hope. Now, on Tuesday of next week, we're going to begin this database project. We are going to create the database. We are going to create the front end that we're going to use. And that might be as far as we get on Tuesday. I don't really know. All right. I'm in the middle of writing this. I'm going to try to get it as fixed up as I can by this weekend. But what I am going to ask is I'm going to show you, we're going to build a splash screen for it on Tuesday and then do some database stuff. But I'm going to incorporate some of the stuff that's earlier in the book that we didn't spend a lot of time on, if any time on. And what I mean is, I'm going to, for example, I'm going to come in here when we create the project, and I'm going to right mouse click on here, and I'm going to choose add, and I'm going to put in a new item here. And what we're going to add is, and maybe I guess I'm doing it the wrong way. We're going to come in here on our solution, and we're going to do an add, and we're going to put in here new item, and we're actually going to come in and use a class library from chapter 16. Now, the advantage of doing this, the reason I'm going to the trouble of doing this, is we're going to create a couple of classes that we're going to put in there, and maybe some other stuff. We might even put the database in there. I don't know. But I want to show you a natural way of setting up a project like this. And I also, want to make sure that you understand the concepts behind using something like a class library. And that mainly is that, we're going to be doing this thing. And I mentioned to you that because I it's just what I picked, that I'm using Garth Brooks, and it's going to be an app in here that's going to allow us to come in and go through his song list. All right. But we could change that. We could make it some other artist and do the same kind of thing. Or we could make maybe some superficial changes. And rather than having it be a music app, we could turn it into a movie app. And the advantage then of taking this stuff and putting it into a class library is hopefully it's going to make a lot more sense once you start seeing that. All right. So as far as what we're going to cover today, in just a second, I'm going to go over chapter 22. I did go out because I like doing this, and I went out and I found this. This is all stuff that's on learnmicrosoft.com. So I went out here to the data grid view class, which is again what we're going to talk about. And I figured it's not going to make a lot of sense to go over a lot of this code. Even if you've read the chapter, it's probably not going to make a boatload of sense. So I went down to the remarks. And again, as you see there, it provides a customizable table for displaying data. That's the idea. So the idea is much like a spreadsheet, it will go in and it will show, unless you tell it otherwise, it'll show all of the rows and all of the columns in any database table that you have. Then you can go in, and I'm not going to read any of this, but they tell some of the stuff that you can do in here. Again, these are more the aesthetic things that I'm not concerned with right now. Do I mean that we're never going to be concerned with them? No, not at all. All right. One thing I'd like to do in the 1115 class, and we'll see if it works or it doesn't work, is I'd like us to start as soon as we get into this where we're actually doing something of merit. So we're a few chapters in. I'd like us to start building a project as a class, but do it earlier. All right. So again, there's a lot of stuff in here. I would say if you're interested at all in walking through this, and maybe you have no interest, but there's just two things in all these links that I would say. One is how to bind data. And when you bind data, basically what you're doing is with that Windows form control is you're letting it know what database and what table is supposed to be shown. The other one is the one on the bottom here, and that is using a master detail. You'll see this at the end of chapter 22. We'll talk about it in a little bit at the end of the chapter. So this was the how to bind data. All right, so I clicked on that one, and they show an example. What I don't like about what Microsoft does, and they do this very routinely, is they give code examples. That's not a problem. All right, but they don't give an actual example with a screenshot of how this code is supposed to look. All right, when you run it, which I think would make even more sense than showing the code. Then there's this walkthrough, so that's the other one that I mentioned with the master detail. All right. I went out too and I found this article, and there's a lot of articles on there, but this was just under csharpcorner.com, which is a pretty nice site. And it's a little bit dated. It's 3 years old. All right. But they talk about the data grid view, and then they have you come in, and basically what they do is they create the control, the data grid view. So it comes up and it looks like this. Then when you do come up with it, you typically click, and it's very hard to see. Even if I make this big, it's very hard to see. But when you put your mouse there on the upper right-hand corner, all right, that creates or opens up what's called a smart tag. And when you open up that smart tag, there'll be nothing in here, but it'll say add project data source. And that's how you can come in and choose a database. All right. And there's a whole wizard and a whole thing that you walk through in here. It's not going to make a whole heck of a lot of sense until we go over it in detail, which we don't do in this class. All right. Again, I think I mentioned this in the video yesterday, and that is at the last time I taught this class, we were a little further ahead than the class is here. So rather than doing a project like I'm going to have you do, we went over much of the code that was in the book. All right. And I went and asked a lot of people afterwards. I said, was this worth it? And almost to a person, they said, no, we just were very confused over what this stuff is. And I said, well, would you do me a favor then? And when you fill out the evaluation for the course, I said, bang on me all you want. I don't care. But if there was something that you think could be improved as far as the way the course is taught, please put that down. You guys will do the same thing. You will be given an online survey at the end of the semester, and it's a 3-part survey. Basically, what they say is, how was the course overall? How was the book overall? How was the instructor overall? I would never tell any of you how to fill out those things other than be bluntly honest, all right, with whatever you say. But one of the things that was said at that time by people was, boy, I think I would have learned more if we would have had some kind of a project. And that's one of the reasons I'm trying to do that. All right, so again, in this article that's here, they walk you through what's going on. You're going to see this kind of thing, not so much that you're going to see it this semester, but you will in a later class. So when you walk in and you choose a database, you've got to choose a connection. And what this says in here, I'm just going to mention a couple things. Right here it says Microsoft SQL Server, SQL Client, which means that you're using Microsoft's SQL Server and you're using it on your own machine. If you click the change button in here, there's other things that you can select, as you'd probably guess. All right. If you use your local one, you can typically just put a period in there. All right. And this in here, because again, sometimes people ask me this stuff. They say, well, what is this for? Well, you can set it up for either Windows authentication or SQL Server authentication. The difference between these is, and I always have people just choose the Windows authentication. And what that means is if you are on the system right now, if you've been authenticated as the user of this account, you can use the database. Sometimes you want to put in an extra level of authentication. So not only do you have to be logged in as you, but then you also, so this is logging you in again, not as a Windows user, but as an SQL Server user. All right. And then finally, once you go through these, whether you click that button or that button, then down here, you should be able to go and click this down arrow, and then every database that's on your system should show. All right. And once you choose the one you want, basically you just tell it to attach it. You can do a test connection, which it'll just basically, it'll beep and it'll say that the test succeeded, and you'll click OK. After you've done all that, then you can say, okay, I've got this database. What do I want to choose in here? And in this example, you'll notice that there's at least 3 tables. There is an advanced table, a login table, and a vendor table. This is saying we're going to use the vendor table, and we're going to use every field that's in it because they're all checked. We don't have to choose them all if we don't want to. All right. So then it's asking again what table you're using. This is all automated. All right. And then after you've done all that, okay, it says on here, choose data source and select the data source you just created, which will be this one. Then when you go through all this stuff, it writes this. This code is written for you. And what's kind of neat is not only is this code written for you, but you can make some changes to it and you get really a relational database management system. So what this is saying, and we're going to go over some of this next week, but show me all of the records and all of the fields that are in the vendor's table. All right. So the process in many ways is at least somewhat automated because it's wizard driven. And after you've done it once or twice, it's not that it's that hard. All right. I'm not going to lie to you and say, oh, it's real easy. All right. But again, I think it will make more sense when we go over this in detail in the AWD1115 class, because there'll be some other chapters that are in that book that'll explain in more depth and breadth of coverage than what you get in here. All right, so chapter 22, not a particularly long chapter, about 30 pages. You'll notice it's split into several sections. First is how to display data in a data grid view control. We'll talk about that. And we'll talk about that in a little bit of depth. Next is how to work with columns and events. We'll talk about that a little bit. Now in here, again, I'm more concerned with the introduction, how to set the functions, how to bind, but the formatting, again, that's doing things like if you've got a field that's holding a currency amount, how to put a $ in there. This for how to format the headers. All right, basically in alternating rows, it's all aesthetic. So it's if you want every other row to be a little bit maybe, maybe every other row is gray. So you've got a white row, then a gray row, then a white row, then a gray row. It's also known as zebra striping. And you'll learn about that next semester in the AWD1000 class. All right. So I'm not that concerned with the formatting stuff is what I'm telling you. We will talk about how to work with the columns and events. We will take a quick look at the product maintenance application. All right. But with that said, I'm not going to really go over any of the code. We'll provide paging. And what paging just means is you can decide how many records you want to show on one screen. Now, I mean, there has to be some kind of limit. You couldn't set it to 100. You wouldn't have room on the screen. But with paging and pagination, what you can do is you can say each page should show 10 records. So once you get to record 10, you go to page 2. Once you get to record 20, you go to page 3, etc. And they show you how to do that. And then I will spend a little bit of time at the end, even though it's just the last 5 pages, talking about the master detail form, because this is pretty much what we're going to be creating in our project. All right. All right. So with all that said, let's just jump into it here. I don't know why this thing does this every once in a while. I have to log out and log back in again. So let me try this again. For whatever reason, like I said, it just locks up. All right. Okay. So I don't want to be too redundant, but as it says there, it displays data in a row and column format. So in other words, it's designed to display data to look like this. All right. Now, a couple more things that they talk about here. The row at the top is the header row. All right. And there's customization that you can do on the header row. I already mentioned, I don't want to talk about the customization. They get into that in here. The foreground and background colors have changed, etc. All right. And some of these auto resizing, and it's just not that important. The important thing is, can you make the data show? All right. And when you do come in and you create this data grid view and you bring up this smart tag, what you can do if you want to is there are going to be 3 options at least that you can choose. Here they said we want to be able to edit the data. So if I click on modify right here, it's going to basically allow me to change anything in here except the primary key field. If I click delete, it's going to come back and it's going to say, are you sure you want to delete this row? And if you say yes, it'll be gone. Now, there's also one for an insert. They didn't choose that one. Instead, they chose to do it by using a button. We could have chosen to use none of these and had nothing there available and then had buttons here. And you might say, well, that's fine. Why would you want to do that? All right. And the reason that you might want to do that and pull that out is, first of all, your interface looks nicer, but it's much easier when you are defining roles, ROLES, in a database and who can do what to basically bring this stuff out externally as opposed to putting it in the data grid view internally. All right. So the properties, as they say, that you're going to want to work with, rows, and that contains every row. And remember, the rows are what go here horizontally. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rows that are showing right now. And then columns, which go vertically. So we've got 1, 2, 3 columns. And again, as you can see, the top column right here, the top column, all right, is has the headers in it. All right. Usually what you can do, and you can set this up, again, not going to go over this now, but you can click on one of these headings. So for instance, if I clicked on this heading, it would show me the products here. All right. And they would be in ascending order based on price. If I clicked it again, they would be showing me the same thing, but in descending order. And then I can do it here or here as well. All right. Finally, we've got the data source, which is, again, the data source for the control. So what we're saying there is, where are you going to get this data from? All right. And again, all the auto resize columns does is it says, hey, if this is too small, let's say, it's going to naturally make it bigger when you bring it up on screen. That's all it's going to do. All right. So let's see. Yeah, as it says, you can also use it in that second bullet there to add, update, and delete data. It's not typically done like that. All right. But it can be. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing it that way. All right. As it says there, if there's too much data, they provide scroll bars. So when you look up here, you can see that we've got a horizontal scroll bar. We don't have that many fields in here, but if we did, it would provide a vertical scroll bar as well. All right. And the rest of the stuff, again, pretty much in there is aesthetic in nature. Now, they do mention, it says there, the data source property determines what data is displayed, and they're going to talk more about that in just a bit. Now, it says instead of using the auto resize, what you can do if you want to is just like with an Excel spreadsheet, if you've ever worked with those, you can take your mouse and up here where we've got the headings, you can go in between the headings here. So right where that little dash or whatever you want to call it here between product code and description, if you double click on that, it'll go and it'll make this as big as it has to be. If you double click on this, it'll make that as big as it has to be, etc. All right. So how to set the functions provided by a data grid view control. Again, it says the easiest way to do this is to use that smart tag. So this is what I mentioned. If you click that up there, it comes up with this. All right. Now, you'll notice that there is no data source chosen. All right. And you also notice it says edit columns and add columns. And then it's got these enable things that are in here. All right. So let's just discuss each one of them. Again, typically you'd want to go in and set the data source first so it knows what you're working with. All right. You can go in here and do some aesthetic stuff in here. All right. So let's pretend for a minute that we have 4 columns. Okay. We have one column that says first name. We have one column that says last name. We've got one column that says hours worked. And we've got another column that says hourly rate. We looked at this when we talked about employees earlier. If we did all that, we could edit the columns for any way we wanted. So again, as an example, we could make sure that for the hourly rate, there was a $sign on there. What we're showing here is a representation of the database data. All right. We can actually change that data from here. Okay. But just because we put a $sign in there doesn't really mean squat, other than it's easier when you look at it aesthetically to figure out what it is. All right. Now, for the add columns, I'm going to give you an example, but it's a crummy example. Let me give it to you, and then I'll tell you why it's crummy. If we wanted to add a new column in there called gross pay and set it equal to the hours worked times the hourly rate, let's just say, we could do that. But one thing you really and truly should never do when you are working with a database, period, is to take calculated columns and put them into a database. You can always create them on the fly, which is considered a much better way of doing it. So in other words, hours worked, yeah, that can change. Hourly rate, yeah, that can change. But for a lot of people, for example, if you work in a factory, the hours that you work are probably going to be the same every week. Your hourly rate may change once a year or whatever, but it's not going to change often. But those are not calculated fields. So a field such as gross pay is a calculated field. You really should never put it in there. But you can add additional columns in there if you want to or need to. These we've already looked at. All right. So back where the enable editing and the enable deleting, that basically means back here, there we had set them. All right. And for the enable adding, we didn't set it because we brought it in with our own button. So again, these basically, if they're Booleans, they're a checkbox. If they're checked, they'll be provided inside here of the data grid view. If they're not checked, they won't be provided inside of there. All right. And the column reordering, if you do check that one, then if it shows you something like this, I can move these columns around. So for instance, if I decided I wanted to modify and the delete to be over here, I could just drag them over and it would work just fine. You're not changing anything in the database. You're changing the visual representation of what you're seeing as far as what's in the database. All right. And the doc in parent container, all right, I guess basically they're just saying you can move that around if you want. I've never played with that one, to be honest with you. All right, so these are some of the properties, again, that you can add from the smart tag. So if you click this, enable adding, you're basically setting the allow users to add rows to true. All right, for the editing, it's the allow users to, I guess there's not even one in there. The ones that are probably going to be the most important for you, you're not going to manually set these. You're going to set them here. But the other one that you actually may want to set is the read only. All right. And I talked about roles before, ROLES. You might want to set up the roles that, if you remember at the beginning of the lecture, when we looked at how, whether you had Windows authentication or whether you had SQL authentication, this might be a time where in a certain company, you might want to give some people read-only permission so they can look at things, but they can't change anything. So if read-only, which is set to false by default, if it's set to true, that means that you, as that user, can look at data, but you can't change it. You can't add new data. You can't modify existing data. You can't delete existing data. All right. So this is where they're coming in and they're talking about how to do this binding. So this is kind of going to go through. And the reason that I showed you that article before is I think that article was a little bit more extensive as far as the way they go through this. All right. So as it says, to display data, you have to bind it to a data source. And don't worry about the I list. It's not really that big a thing because a lot of this is happening behind the scenes. All right. So it says here that this next figure is going to show you 3 different ways you can bind a data grid view to a data source. All right. The first, as it says, it's bound to an entity collection created by the entity framework. All right. That's what we talked about back in chapter 20. Okay. It says when you bind a data grid view to an entity collection, each property is displayed by default. I mean, they're saying that's everything. Another option, as they mentioned in there, is to use a link query to retrieve only the information you want. So again, if you've got 10 columns, you might only be concerned with 2 or 3 of them. All right. So you'd probably want to use a query to go to be in there as your data source. All right. And it says if you're using AWD1000, which was the chapter we went over yesterday, rather than the entity framework, you can call a method that gets a collection of objects. Again, it's not where you're typically going to have to worry about it because once you get to that point, at least ideally, this is going to make a lot more sense to you. So they show you different ways that you can do this binding in here. And again, it may make a little bit of sense. It may make absolutely no sense to you. But either way, it's totally fine. Because what they say in here, I'm not going to repeat a word of it. It's what I just explained to you, that there's different ways of binding to a data source. All right. And this, like I said, I didn't want to spend much time in here because they talk about how you can do formatting. We're not that concerned right now with formatting. We are concerned with being able to set up our data source and bring in our data. All right. So they talk in here about header text. All right. By default, what you see up here for titles, that's going to be the name that it has in the database. So for instance, rather than product code like this with a space between it, it might be product code like it's one word put together. So with this header text, you can pretty it up a little bit. All right. Because a lot of times when you go and you write code like this and you run queries like this, what you're doing is you are basically setting things up so that people can run reports off the data based off what you're giving them. So like I said, header text can be important. Column width can be important. You wouldn't want to, for instance, on hand here, you wouldn't want to be, having this be so narrow that one or more of these numbers weren't even being shown. All right. And with the default cell style, again, it's more generic or more aesthetic in nature as far as what you can do. So this is some of the stuff, and I already mentioned in here. So for instance, you could take now that dollar amount that's set to currency, basically that unit price. They didn't do it in here, but you can set it up here. So it's got a comma format. So that would have been 3,756. All right. If you've got, as we talked about before, if you've got hours worked, you might want to do that to 2 decimal places. Those are the kinds of things that you're able to do. And again, the other ones, back color is just the background color, fore color is the text color. All right, alignment. I mean, a lot of people are real quirky about this stuff. What I mean is, what you can do if you want to, if you think it looks better, is you can center align things. So you could have everything that's in here look centered. Right now, it's all left justified if it's a string value, and it's right justified if it's a numeric value. Some people don't like that, so you can change that stuff around too. As they mentioned there, you can also play around with the font that's being used. Now, the reason that may be important is you may want to go in and reset the font size, all right, because things aren't real easy to see. All right. It says you can also format the column headers and the alternating rows. So again, you can see what they've done here. All right, and what I mean is every other row is a different color. You can set what that color is. All right, and as I mentioned before, and you're going to hear about this next semester in the AWD1000 Web Development Technologies class, this is referred to typically as zebra striping. All right, and then they show you how you can do that. It's not that big of a thing. All right, let's see. This sort mode, I sort of mentioned this before, but basically if it's set, that means that you can click on the heading and it'll sort whatever is in the column in ascending order. You can click on it again and it'll sort it in descending order. And when I say it's going to sort it, so if it was set right here, if these were all the table values, if I clicked on product code, it would be just like this because that's already in alphabetic order. If I clicked on it again, it would be JS, then JSP, then Java, then HTML, etc. But not only do these end up sorting, so do these. In other words, it wouldn't just sort this column and leave these three alone. It would resort everything. So in other words, if we clicked on product code and then clicked on it again, this entire record or this entire row would move to the top, and the record that's on top would move to the bottom, etc. All right. Okay, how to work with columns and events. As it says, the data grid view controls in most production applications don't provide those things in there for adding, modifying, and deleting data. Rather, typically they're added, or the user adds them themselves with buttons. All right. So as it says right there, the next figure shows how to add a button column to a data grid view control. Again, I'm not going to run through this, all right? But it's kind of what you think it would be. So they do run through here how they added I don't know if it's the add, it looks like a delete button, all right? So then instead of putting it here, that would basically put it down here someplace, all right? And again, that's considered, it's one of those things. It's not so much that this is wrong to put it in here, but it's considered a better practice to put it in there separately. All right. If the person is clicking the button, it's like they knew what they were doing. We're up here. If they accidentally clicked one of these, maybe it would be an accident. All right. How to work with the object that's passed as the event handler. One thing that's kind of interesting in here, I don't know if it's going to show it or not. So let's see. Yeah. All right. We've never really talked much about this. And if you say, what do you mean this? Well, if I go back to our program here that we'll look at, and this is the button that we run when we execute the query. All right. Well, this right here, we've never really talked about it, or if we haven't talked about it much. All right. The sender that you see right there is what caused the action to take place. I mean, technically, you're the sender in this case because you're the one that clicked the button. The event args for a button doesn't make a lot of sense, but let's suppose for a second that we were creating our own game. All right. And we wanted to be able to move the mouse around the screen. Maybe it was going to be something where we were going to shoot things that were coming down on the screen, etc. Well, when you work with mouse clicks, then event args become important because it shows you exactly where you are on the screen. All right. So sender is basically what caused the action to take place, and event args makes sense for certain things that you talk about. All right. So it says here, when the user performs an operation on a cell of the data grid view control, like if they click on that cell, notice it says the data grid view cell event args object is passed to the event handler that occurs. All right. And again, why is that important? For what we're doing, it's not. But I do want to mention in here, I'm going to back up just for a second, that this is the product code. And to my knowledge, I could be wrong here, but to my knowledge, I either that's the primary key, I don't remember, or the primary key is not shown. I'm going to guess that the primary key is not shown in here. Remember that primary key is a unique record identifier. And typically you don't show that, you as another column here, or if you do, you make sure that it's set to read only. Because one thing that you should never, ever, ever allow to happen is once a primary key has been set and you put in your data, you shouldn't allow that primary key to change. All right. Now it's interesting. This is sort of related and sort of not, but I got an email yesterday that said, come spring, we have to all go into Rankin and get new IDs. All right. I've got an ID and that allows me to get into the doors, etc. Because a lot of times I'm the first person in the building when I go in, because I usually get there around 5:30 or so. All right. But they're having a whole new thing that they're putting in there, which said to me that possibly, at least, maybe they've had some security breaches or whatever. Well, on my Rankin ID, it has my picture, it has a number, and it has some kind of a code on it. Well, that way, what they can do is they can tell whenever I badge in, is what's referred to. So sometimes I go in there on weekends because I use their printers, so I don't have to use my own if I'm printing out something for work. All right. And in the same way, I've got a parking pass and it's set up the same way. Well, what I'm saying is those numbers that are in there or whatever, those are like primary keys. A primary key should both be unintelligible. So if somebody discovers your primary key, they can't do anything with the information that's in there. And it should be unchanging. All right. Okay. So here, as it says, these are the different things. Okay. The row index and the column index, etc. So this basically is going to identify what piece of data you're looking at. All right. You can read that if you've got an interest. So they come back and they've been using this product maintenance application. All right. And they've been working with it. It's a little bit different from what was in there before because previously they were showing customers. All right. And now they're showing the different products that are available in here. Now, what does this mean? Well, if you look, you'll notice for add product, it's add or modify, I guess. All right. But when you bring it up, it's bringing up an external form. Now, what's in there? The code, the description, and the price. There's only 3 fields here. All right. So again, it's not, that's saying to me that the product code is not the primary key because you can go in there and modify an existing product code. All right. So let's say that there actually is a language called C++. There's another language called C. Then there's our C#. Well, let's pretend in here that for the Murach C++ programming, we accidentally just put a C here instead of a C++. Then we could click modify over here. That would bring that up and we could change any of these fields. So we could change and add the plus plus, or if we spelled something wrong in here, or if the price changed. All right. And we literally could set this up. All right. That the reason that they have in here add product, and the reason that this says add modify product form, it's the same form. It's the same form. In fact, if you click delete, it's still going to be pretty much the same form. All right, but if you click accept in a delete, it's going to ask, are you sure you want to remove that record? And if you do, it's going to remove it. When we create the database project that we're working on, we are going to set it up. And even though it's not the best way of doing it, it's to me, it was the way that was the most intuitive and made the most sense, that you're going to be able to check or to click on any one of the albums, and you're going to be able to remove the album, modify it in case you spelled it wrong, or insert a new album. All right. And then we're going to be able to do the same thing, that if we click on an album, what it's going to show down below it in a master detail that we'll look at in just a moment is it'll show all the songs that are on that album. And you'll be able to add a song if one was left off. You'll be able to remove a song if it didn't belong there, and you're able to modify a song. All right. And it's always up to us what information that we put in there. I tried to keep this stuff basically down to a minimum, so it would be enough that it would, you could see something happening, but not so much that it would overpower anybody. All right. So they go through what's happening in here. And you'll notice, for example, with the delete, okay, I guess they're not even showing this. If you click delete, rather than showing this, which sometimes people do, because before you delete something, they want to show you everything that's in there to make sure you know what it is. But here, if you click delete, it's just coming up and it's showing you the code. So it's saying delete followed by whatever code was there. All right. If you say yes, it's gone. If you say no, it's like you never did anything. All right. And if you click add there, it's going to show you this form, but this form is going to be, there'll be nothing in here, nothing in here, and nothing in here, unless you put some kind of a check in. So let's say that I already have C++ in here, you can see it. All right. But if I went in and clicked add product and put in all of this information exactly as it was and clicked accept, now I'd have two things with different primary keys that would be the same thing. So how do you keep that from happening? Well, one way is I could come in here and say, when you click accept, check and see if that code already exists in the database. And if it does, don't allow it. All right. So these are the kinds of things that as a programmer, you have to think about. All right. So again, I'm not going to go through the code that's in this. Okay. But I want to get us to the next sections. So they talk about pagination next. I've already mentioned what this is. As they mentioned there, if the data source contains a large number of rows, you may want to let the user go page by page rather than using a scroll bar. All right. So they're going to add pagination to this particular example. So you'll notice it says we've got 70 records and we're showing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And notice they at least appear to be in order based on that name. So if we wanted something where the name started with a Z, we could probably be pretty sure that it would be at the end. So we could come in here where it says 1. Now, are there 70 pages? Probably. Not 70 records. There's probably 70 pages. It could be that number of records. It could be the number of pages. So I could come in here and I could put in 70 and it would get me to the end. I think I mentioned this the other day, that these buttons that are right here, the double less than sign that's right there says go to the first record. We're already there, so it's grayed out. All right. The one next to it with a single less than sign means previous record. We're already at record 1, so that's grayed out. The next one with a greater than sign, if we click that, we'd go to the next record. And if we went and clicked the double one, we'd go to the last record. And I did mention the other day when I talked about this, sometimes people make this circular. And what I mean is, if you're at the beginning, sometimes they don't have these grayed out. When you click on it, if you're at the beginning, you just go to the end. And when you're at the end and you click these, you go to the beginning. All right. So we can, I guess there must be 70 records in here. So we can either go to a particular record or we can go to a particular page. All right. So again, they show the code in there for doing that. And it's a calculation in here. So what they're saying is basically if there's 10 per page, if we have reached 10, bump up our pages by 1 and basically start showing the stuff on a brand new page. And the last thing that's in here, come on, there you are, is more of what we're going to be doing. And that is to create a master detail form. Typically, with a master detail form, you will have 2 data grid controls. The one on the top will typically be the master, or whatever you want to say, what's in charge, etc. And the one down below will be the detail. So for instance, if you look at the example here, so these are our customers. So if you click, as it says there, on Sarah Cumberland, and you look down below, then these down here, these are the invoices for that person. If we change to Walter Chanduri, that would change to all of Walter's. It's possible that if it's a new customer who hasn't ordered anything yet, this could be empty. It's possible that if you've got a customer who's been around for years, this could be really big. And again, scroll bars will automatically be added on here. So again, and I think you already get this, but I want to make sure what we're going to have when we create our thing next week is right here. This will be a listing of albums, and there's 15. Probably we'll set it up so you can see all 15. Let's just see how it looks when we do it. But if you click album 1 here, then what it will show down here will be all of the songs that are in that album. And again, we'll have the ability to come in here and do a lot of these operations. All right. And that pretty much, to my knowledge at least, yep, that's it. All right. So again, I have been asked this. I had at least one person who had emailed me. So I do want to make sure that everybody realizes if you are behind on work and you want to turn in something, even if it's late, can you turn it in? The answer is yes, you can turn it in. Now, if it was something and that was due a week ago, I'm not going to take much off because it was late. But if it's something that is, let's assume for a second that you haven't turned in any of the written tests all semester. All right. And we've already gone through, we've done the written test basically through like chapter whatever, 18 or whatever it was. We haven't had 18 of them. Some of them we've skipped. But if you didn't even do the ones that we did as a class for chapters 1, 2, and 3, and now you turn them in, will you still get credit? Yes. But if it's that late, you'll get no more than 50% credit. So in other words, if the tests have been worth 20 points each, so you would get a maximum of 10. And I will really scrutinize them to make sure you've got most, if not all of them right. All right. If you decide to do that, if you decide that you would like to turn in work late, all right, then what I ask is that after you've turned it in, just send me an email and just say, hey, I didn't do this earlier. And would you please grade it now so I can give you some points? I mean, when you think about it, if there's 22 written tests, and let's just assume for a second we do 15 of them. I don't know if we did more than that or less than that, but let's assume 15. All right. So 15 written tests at 20 points each is 300 points, which basically is the equivalent of 3 tests. So if you've done none of them all semester, all right, that means you've lost 300 points. But if you've done none of them all semester and now you go back and you do all of them, 150 points is a heck of a lot better when we're doing your final totals than 0 points is. All right. And that's why, like I said, when people ask, that's what I'm willing to do. All right. And again, it all goes back to how late is it? So again, I am going to do my darndest to make sure that if you go tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow, Friday, 11/18/2022, and you go in and you look at your grades in Inside Rankin, all right, that it's up to date. All right. And I've got everything graded through like 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. All right. And what's nice about that is if I have time then, next Wednesday, and I don't know if I said this earlier and I should have put it into your email this morning, but I will in the one I send out later, is the chapters 19, 21, and 22 written tests are not due this Sunday. I'm going to give them to you. You can turn them in up until midnight Wednesday. I don't want to screw up anybody's Thanksgiving. So, we'll just set it up like that. All right. And then finally, the last thing I'll say, and probably this may affect one person and nobody else. All right. I mean, if you're really doing that bad in here that you're in danger of failing, all right, I don't give extra credit, just so you know. I never have understood this, that people who are behind have said to me, can I do extra credit to make it up? No, you can do the work that was due to make it up. All right. But if, we've gotten to the point where this is all points based. So you should be able to go out there. Yeah, I haven't graded the last few assignments. All right. I will again, like I said, either tonight or tomorrow morning. But you should be able to go out and know exactly where you are. All right. I'm not going to be able to really help you at all. As far as, like I said, I will just tell you exactly what I'm saying right now. And that is get as much work done as you possibly can. All right. So with that, tomorrow is a lab. Monday, we're going to be doing, as I already showed you, we're going to be going through and doing this. All right. It's also going to give me a chance. Right now, I've got this in a MySQL database. I'm going to see if I can put it into an SQL Server database so we can talk. The difference is SQL Server is the database that's designed to work with Visual Studio. It's a Microsoft product, so it's designed to work with Microsoft. You can get non-Microsoft databases to work without that much trouble. But it would be kind of nice to show you, the stuff that actually is included. Included's the wrong word, but it's the stuff that's designed to work with the software that we're using. All right. So again, as always, you got questions about anything, whatever it is, your grades or whatever, it is your responsibility to email me and ask. All right. We also, again, if you are that far behind, we don't have much time left. Today's day 62. All right. So we have 18 class periods left after today. But there is at least one person, I think his name is Zach, who is volunteered to tutor. He has taken the class already. He is out of St. Louis, but he will electronically tutor you if need be. If that's something that you're interested in, please immediately send me an email and let me know that, and I'll try to put you in touch with him. I have no idea how many people he's tutoring, but you have to always, as you probably guess, you have to work around his schedule, not yours. All right. So with all that out of the way, tomorrow again will be lab, and we will be basically recreating the project you see on your screen on Monday. So with all that said, thank you. Have a nice weekend.
Have a nice weekend.
Thank you. You too.